7, and it really takes the Doing Business Index one level down to the provincial level and looks at the local enabling environment for business enterprises. We've done it in Philippines, Vietnam, and Cambodia. And I think one of the discussion, the issues related to extensive waiting and procedures for registration, like building permits and trade licenses, comes up. The lack of consultation on local development planning, issues related to leasing of land, and uncertainty related to security issues, and so on. So very much similar issues, whether you're at the sort of capital city level or whether you're at the provincial level. And so with just those opening thoughts, I thought we'll give each of the speakers 5 to 7 minutes, perhaps to give 1 or 2 points that they would like to provoke some discussion, and then we'll really open the floor for discussion with everyone. And I'm gonna somewhat randomly pick people from the group in no particular order. If I could ask Pradeep Kumar Shrestha to start with your comments, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. This is Pradeep Shrestha. I'm from the private sector. Well, in the morning I was a little late, but there were a lot of questions soured to the private sector, which I could have responded. Anyway, the subject that we have taken up with the SMEs is so important for the countries that we are living in this region. As we know that with the population that we have in this region, in spite of the rich people with per capita income of nearly $750. But the fact remains is that the challenges for the private sector is coming up in a big way. And Nepal has, from the chamber perspective, we have seen in a different way. The growth that we are having is very, very nominal. And we know that in the world, the SMEs have occupied a very important position by generating employment. Generation, I think a lot of, even in this Asian countries, it is ranging from 20 to 40%. And I think one thing that we have to also understand is that even in the region, the product that we deal, there is sometimes we are just competing, not complementing. That is what I think. I like to give a very nice example. When Nepal started exporting carpets or one of the major items like pashmina, so there a lot of countries were trying to come out with the similar product. So we were not, we were changing the buyers market to a seller's market to the buyer's market. So they were dictating the terms, This is one thing I think we, the South Asian countries, should really understand. And one thing that we have to also understand is that every country has its own potential. So we have a cheap labor force, but with the lack of opportunities that is having in this region, a lot of these youngsters are migrating to other countries. And now the whole economy is turning into a remittance economy. Even in the case of Nepal, we say now remittance economy. A lot of these foreign currency is getting earned from the labors that is going there. And now the challenges for us is that when they return back, how do you absorb? So industrialization is would be one of the basic way to absorb this manpower who is going to return back in your home. And if you see, compare the countries in the ASEAN countries, I think I think Thailand could be a very good example. where more than 80 to 90% of the product that they are generating from the SMEs are really substituting the import, and the employment that is generated through it has been a good example in the region. Of course, the countries like Taiwan also, it would be a very good example. But one thing that we have to understand is these countries like Japan or in the Asian countries like Korea, Singapore, they have big industries also. But in our case, in the South Asian countries, we don't have huge industries. These are interlinked with these SMEs, So that is one thing that we have to look into it, and also find out ways and means to address our dependency syndrome has to be interdependency syndrome, And when you talk on the world scenario, and every country has its own strength. When you start a morning tea, probably you would like to think of Darjeeling tea, And when you want to think of constructing a house, maybe you think of a marble, Italian marble. You want to have cigar, you maybe Cuban cigar. If you want to have a whiskey, you have the Scotch whiskey. So every country has its own identity, So in the region, I think we have to complement each other and not compete. There has to be a competition. I totally vow on having a free, or we are already accepted the open market economy. And we have to compete with each other, and I think complement. And I think this region, with its vast resources that we have, I think we should be in a position to capitalize it, and this whole region should grow together. So this is one, I just want to leave it for this thought, because I have already seen the red flag.
Already.
Thank you very much.
That was actually the green flag, but but that's all right. Thank you. I think that's a good point to end, actually, in terms of competing and not, and rather to compete rather and to complement. The thought comes up immediately when you say Darjeeling tea, because here you are in the wrong place to say that, actually. Because we would put on the table Ceylon tea, right? Nevertheless, I think you also bring up an interesting point on Taiwan, which I think the idea of the diaspora also came up in a very big way, in terms of discussion that happened this morning. And Taiwan really, it's the SME development in Taiwan was so connected to its diaspora and coming back and investing in Taiwan. It's something that we in South Asia really haven't found out how to engage and mobilize in any way. I'd like to move on to Mr. Manab Majumdar, who is from Assistant Secretary General of the Federation of Indian Chambers. Mr. Majumdar.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. In the context of those pressing factors, globalization, integration, call it internationalization, what are the critical success factors? What are the factors pushing SMEs, and what are the determinants through which SMEs, small enterprises, they can really play a greater role in overall economic growth, internationalization and globalization process? I would try to highlight that. See, the first point is the question, the real question before us should be looked at as follows. Globalization, internationalization, etc. Do we have any alternative? In my assessment, actually there is none. So if you agree that the process is inevitable, then the next task is how to really address that, how to really integrate within that process. Now, many times, many small enterprises argue, see, I am not export oriented. I don't really, and I don't get engaged in foreign trade. So why should I bother? That part, one has to reach out to them and make them understand. And there lies the role of chambers of commerce and other non-state actors. That even if your company itself is not directly engaged in exports, but because of these global forces, your customers are now better aware and they will always try to benchmark, if not global, at least the regionally available best prices, best qualities. Similarly, your competitors are exposed to the opportunities or challenges of the global process. So from that perspective, my take is one has to flow along the global integration, if not global, regional integration at least. Next point is the optimistic scenario is there was a survey by Oxford Economics research team recently, and that was a survey quite broad based that covered 2100 SME executives from over 20 countries, and it has shown, and that gives really hope for us, that the survey findings suggest that just 12%, only 12% of SMEs earn their revenue exclusively from home operations or domestic sales. In fact, the survey also suggests that this figure is likely to come down to 4% in next 3 years. That means we are very much there along the flow of global integration. Now, of course, there could be many determinants, but in the interest of time, let me divide it into two blocks. One is the drivers or the policy interventions, or what are the facilitation measures which are required to get SMEs in the process and to strengthen so that they can play a greater role. And second is, what are the exact role and responsibilities of the SMEs themselves. So if you can distinguish between these two, then we probably will avoid, reasonably will be successful to avoid the situation where it's just we end up in a blame game. One has to appreciate that even SMEs, small enterprises themselves, have got certain roles to play. Of course, there could be many nomenclature, many ideas, but in the interest of time again, if we could divide them in the first block A in 4 or 5 sub-blocks. One is certainly the availability of finance credit, which has come in the just concluded plenary session as well. Whatever estimate you take, the point is availability of credit flow is quite low to small enterprises. So what would be the way and means to enhance the finance and credit flow for small enterprises? There could be several ways, but I would just like to highlight one particular, namely factoring services. If you look into the mismatch or asymmetry between the receivables, then the factoring services can certainly help. Technology. The survey I have referred to earlier, that by Oxford Economic Survey, they have shown that investing in technology is the top strategic priority among small and medium enterprises. 60% of Asia Pacific SMEs, they believe that technology would help them in better integration. So whatever it takes in terms of policy measures, ranging from setting up tool rooms to technology development centers, that should be there. Infrastructure, very obvious, I don't need to get into the detail, but just to highlight that apart from physical and industrial infrastructure, we need to really address the standards and technical regulations complying infrastructure as well, quality related. Next block is skill development, National Skill Development Corporation of India could be one good model to look at. NSDC, it is available on the website. Marketing and procurement. Procurement is certainly a useful tool, critical tool. So that could be taken. Yeah, just 15 seconds more. In terms of the roles and responsibilities of SMEs, my take is that one has to change the culture, and one has to change the framework of thinking small, thinking weak all the time. One has to look at in terms of only competitiveness. Being small doesn't give you any license to remain weak or uncompetitive over the years. So the way all large enterprises are not competitive, similarly, it is not necessary that small enterprises should remain uncompetitive all the time. So competitiveness, if they can change, they can gear up, it will really help. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Majumdar. I think we'll move on to Mr. Edgard Rodriguez, from Specialist on Supporting Inclusive Growth from IDRC.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you very much for the organizers of this panel, because we really consider that this is an extremely important topic, the promotion of private sector development. And IDRC, the International Development Research Center, is a specialized agency that focuses on research, and the topic of private sector development has not always been the first theme that would have come to mind in terms of research. So for us, it's a really new area where where we think that research can play a role. And therefore, like when it came up to this panel and I look at the questions, one of the questions was, what sort of research we should be undertaking to promote private sector development. So I thought this is great. And my intervention will be around, of course, that question 8 in the set of questions that were sent around. So the other question that you had for the panel was the obstacles. So what I think let me try a couple of quick answers and elaborate a little bit. And I hope I won't take my allotted time. So with respect to the obstacles, so we're going to hear a lot about what the obstacles that you're going to face as small enterprises, and there are more people who have more practical experience of what is affecting or the development of small enterprises. But one short answer to that question, then I'm going to elaborate that, is the low productivity of small enterprises. And that might seem like a very simple thing to say, but it's the disparity between the very low productivity of the small firms and the large firms that is a problem. And from the research point of view, this is something that I want to, it's important for us to emphasize that it's not only a problem for the firm, but it's a problem for the entire economy. Okay? Because one of the, and I'm going to elaborate a little bit further that point. And the second aspect of what are some of the type of research that we need to conduct, we've heard in the plenary that, and this was the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce person who said, like, we have already a lot of research on what to do, but sometimes we don't know how to do it. So one of the points I would like to make about this type of research is to actually go back and take a look at some of the studies that have been done on evaluating specific programs. That in itself, a research already being done, should shed some light on what is that is not being effective. So I'll elaborate a little bit more on that point. And in terms of new topics of research, I think that we should be looking more at issues of regulations that have hardly been touched by economic research. And one other point will be the case for women's entrepreneurs. I think that we are missing out on making the argument, not so much for the fairness, which we all accept that the case, but in terms of making the economic case for, yes, it makes sense to support women's entrepreneurs in the economy. So let me go back now that I said I already told you what I'm going to say, just to elaborate a little bit more on those points. So the first one, in terms of the productivity, What I meant is like, we all know that there are small firms that have very low productivity. In the case of India, the productivity of firms employing 6 to 9 workers is only 10% of the productivity that you would observe in firms that employ more than 250 workers or more. That's a humongous difference. That's a humongous disparity. Now, if you have a lot of firms, and we can go over the statistics for other countries, and Latin America may be lower, but even is the case in some other countries. But in India, for example, just to give, it's a close example to all of us, that disparity, that very low productivity, if you have a sea of small firms that are in that situation, is really dragging in your growth. Very low productivity, they are not growing fast, so you have to rely on the Tatas, on any other large conglomerates to actually make up for that. So there is a cost for the entire economy. So that's one thing. I mean, that we should be looking or being aware of that more. Second second point of why low productivity affects us all is because the small firms are not learning to do certain things, or they are not capable of engaging either in trade or learning new technologies, and that explains their low productivity, but that also explains the reason why the whole economy is not growing fast. They are not becoming effective subcontractors, for example. You cannot see compared to Southeast Asia, where you have a lot of small firms that were ready to engage in trade, engage as suppliers of larger firms. In South Asia, you have that challenge. So, and the third aspect of the low productivity is that it reflects in your entire inequality. Inequality has increased a lot. One of the reasons, and there's some research that backs it up, I can give you some of the IDRC sponsored research we have, looks at that issue, that reflects into the level of inequality in the whole economy, and so it should be taken seriously. In terms of, so that's kind of the case for why this is an obstacle. The obstacle of SMEs is just much bigger for the economy. In terms of the new topics of research, as I said, looking at the evaluation done for many plans, for many other programs. In South Asia, you don't have the same tradition of evaluation that, for example, has flourished in Latin America. Every single program that is supporting small enterprises now is being evaluated and criticized. You hear a lot of new programs being introduced from the Philippines, from Malaysia, still in Philippines especially. There's lots of examples, and I'm sure in South Asia you're not short of them. But what you're short of is of trying to see, does it work? And what can I learn from that? Like, for example, providing business development services. They should be charged. They should not be free. This is work, for example, from the Asia Foundation. There are tons of things that we have already learned that we should really dwell more into. The aspect of regulations is self-explanatory, but I can get back on the discussion on that, and I'm sure that some of the panelists will have more ideas on that. The point I wanted to say to end up with is the case of promoting women's entrepreneurship. This is not an issue of just fairness, as I said before, but it should be really looking at how much we're missing out by not integrating women into the economic life. In the case of Brazil ranks, by the way, as badly as India in the Doing Business report. And we know that we have many characteristics that you can think of that are attached to Brazilian women. Well, they're beautiful, they're good looking, but they are in the same situation of earning less than men, than participating less in the economic life of Brazil. They earn 60% of what Brazilian men earn. And in the case of engagement with enterprise development, they also lack that. And trying to support that is going to represent an increase in the GDP of Brazil tremendously by introduction of some policies that would be looking at that, how that insertion will work. It's really a very good use of policy money. And we should be looking at doing more of that in South Asia. And just a small mention on that, IDRC and DFID in the UK have actually launched a new initiative that will be looking at research that will focus on the role of women in small enterprises. That is called GROW, and I can talk to you more at the end of the talk about this new initiative. Thank you.
Okay, I think I think I'm going to not try to comment in between, so that way we'll move on to a better discussion at the end. But I think the whole issue of women and entrepreneurship is something we should probably come back to in the discussion, because it impacts on access to credit as well as on some of these micro-level issues that you had brought up. So I think, shall we move on to Anushka Wijseinha, whom you've all, I think, no longer needs any introduction. So Anushka, how about you?
Thank you. Dinesha. So I think I'll say a few things, but what I'll start by saying is that much of the work that we have done or that I'm familiar with is for Sri Lanka and not for wider South Asia. Some of that is also with the Asia Foundation. But we're taking a few steps on looking at South Asia with a project that I'm working on with Daniel, the Gini. So those insights will come out later. So what I'll do is initially, I'm not going to say too much about Sri Lanka, but I think many of the issues faced by SMEs, I think one of the questions in the question list was what are the constraints to SMEs? And many of those issues faced by SMEs in Sri Lanka are shared in broader South Asia. So if you look at access to credit, access to technology, business development services, policy climate and policy constraints, taxation, the extent of government regulation or facilitation, access to markets, all of those, to varying degrees, each of those are common across South Asia. And in fact, most are shared even with wider Asia and indeed Latin America. But what interests me sometimes when I look outside South Asia towards some Southeast and other East Asian countries, in particular, and some of the ASEAN countries, like Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, is that how these are being tackled in a more holistic manner. And like a more holistic approach to tackling all of those that I talked about. And that brings me to the first of the three big points that I want to make. The first is that when we talk about the SME challenges and addressing those challenges, one of the big challenges that keeps coming up is access to credit. Equally, one of the big solutions that keep coming up, at least from what I see in Sri Lanka, and maybe Edgard can talk about how it is in other countries, the big solution, panacea, magic bullet fix is concessionary loan scheme. So a cut price loan scheme for SMEs or a special credit line, either administered by a country's central bank with partner financial institutions. And I see that not just with governments, I see that with donors, as concessionary loan schemes being the panacea for all SME troubles. And going back to something that Edgard mentioned, we have very little assessment of these also. Sometimes there's a 50 to 60% unutilized disbursement at the sunset period. We sometimes don't know whether the conditions that were set at the start really were achieved at the end of it. So, but also if we were to even look at the issue of access to credit, it may not be right, and many of you who work on SMEs would know that you can't just say, okay, addressing access to credit is concessionary loan schemes, because I think even Mr. Majumdar mentioned this, that tackling the inherent SME within SME, internal SME issues that they have, that affects them from accessing credit, helping them manage their finances better, structuring the enterprise as an actual enterprise, focusing on things like productivity, bookkeeping, all of that also affects access to credit. And often we see many of the programs designed to address access to credit issues are just limited to concessionary loan schemes. So I think that's something that we need to do a lot more work on. You talked about regulation and all of that also. So the second point I want to make is information on SMEs. And I think we all talk about what do we do about SMEs, what are their constraints, but really do we have how much, and do we really have credible and comprehensive information on our SME sectors in our countries? Often primary surveys that are large enough and comprehensive enough to be undertaken by research institutes, it's too expensive, and we don't end up doing enough, or it's not large enough for us to really draw some national level conclusions. At least in the Sri Lanka case, only until very recently, that wasn't part of national statistics or surveys. That wasn't the focus. But recently I hear that an economic census being done this year will capture that. So maybe I'd like also to hear from Suraya, because I did hear that Malaysia SME Corp one of and other SME agencies around East Asia were able to focus on this element, because good policy making on SMEs would need good information. The third point I want to leave with you is on SME policy making. And the reason I bring this up is because I've been involved a little bit with the policy making, SME policy environment here. And a few things. Something I noticed when we talk about SME policy is that the picture is very, very fragmented. I'm not sure how true this is in SAARC countries, but in Sri Lanka, the SME development space is crowded and fragmented. You have the SME authority that was designed as the apex authority coming under the Ministry of Industry and Commerce. You have the Industrial Development Board that has some technical services and also industrial estates for SMEs. That comes under Ministry of Traditional Enterprise and Traditional Industries and Small Enterprise Development. You have a technology transfer at the local level under the Vidata scheme that is supposed to help small enterprises. That comes under the Ministry of Technology and Research. You have the Small Enterprises Development Division coming under the Ministry of Youth Affairs. Chambers of Commerce are working with donors to have SME interventions, loan schemes, very good programs, but that's been done by them. Some of the donors, because of the design of lending now and external loans coming in, are working exclusively, for instance, with the Ministry of Finance and Planning on SME development. And sometimes Ministry of Finance and Planning wouldn't understand the enterprise element, which is fair. So this is just to give you an idea of how fragmented it is. So if it is fragmented for policy researchers to understand, for an SME that just wants to get some help, where does it go? So my point here is the need for a better SME development strategy, rethinking how we tackle SME development. And I would just want to leave 3 characteristics that it would be nice to see in SME policies, 3 of, I'm sure, many. The first is that it should be holistic. Wider coverage going beyond just loans. We see that too often. The second is that it should be coherent. No conflicts and confusion with other policies, because an SME may hear about one scheme from one ministry under one definition for an SME and another one from another, and he's not able to tap that, and that coherence needs to come in. And the final is to make SME development policies or strategy, whatever you want to call it, inclusive, where all these stakeholders are on the same page. All of the government agencies that have some mandate for SMEs, the banks, the donors who have a program or one of their programs on SMEs, government agencies, provincial authorities and local authorities. I know the Asia Foundation is focusing on that, because that point of interaction between the local government authority and SME. So holistic, coherent and inclusive SME development strategy. So those are my 3 points. Thank you.
Thanks, Anusha. I think that's a really helpful thing also in terms of the SMEs that are completely sort of not considered, and goes back to the women as well, is this informal sector that we talked about, that was discussed in the morning. And they fall out from, in terms of any discussion on access to credit, in terms of SME policy making and so on. I mean, and women mostly because women-headed households, especially we find in Sri Lanka, that these household level enterprises are not getting recorded, or their issues are not coming into any discussion on policy at all. And so that's something to look at as well. I think I'd like to move on to Suraya Rahman to give us an external view from outside the South Asia region, which we're all looking forward to.
Okay, good morning, everyone. First of all, I think I'm seriously the one which is at a disadvantage. Everybody's talking about the same region, but I'm coming from a different region. But nevertheless, I think, as Anushka mentioned, the intention was to bring in, for me to share with all of you what have we done in ASEAN, because the point that he mentioned just now about the regional coordination as well as national coordination is something that we at SME Corp do. First and foremost, I just want to introduce to you, SME Corp is actually an agency under the Ministry of International Trade and Industry of Malaysia. And we were established in 1996 to look into the development of SMEs, particularly in the manufacturing sector. And then in 2004, we were expanded to look into the services sector. And then again in 2009, because we did such a good job for these 2 sectors, we were actually expanded to become the central coordinating agencies for SME development in Malaysia. Okay, with regards to ASEAN as a whole, I'm sure most of you are aware of our ambition to be a single single community by 2015, the ASEAN Economic Community. Under the ASEAN Economic Community for SME development, actually, our objective is to become a single production center within the region, whereby each country will not compete against each other, but rather we work in terms of a complementary relationship, whereby priority sectors has been identified since way back, since the year 2000. One of the examples for Malaysia, we are actually the lead country for the rubber product. Singapore is the lead country for services sector as well as for ICT. Thailand as the lead country for textile as well as tourism sector. So you see, within the region itself, we have identified our own focus area just to make sure that we do not compete and we continue to complement. With regards to SME development initiative in ASEAN, what is interesting is there has been effort to actually establish what we call as the ASEAN SME Working Group. This working group, the members are actually SME development agencies in all of the ASEAN countries. The 10 agencies will meet twice a year. And during this session, they will discuss issues as well as look for ideas to see how they can actually improve the development of SMEs within their own countries. And these recommendations, because this morning I hear a lot of comments were said, how do we bring these recommendations to the attention of the policymaker, to the attention of the leaders. So our avenue is actually to bring all recommendations or projects that we are working on to the highest level, which is the ASEAN Economic Ministers. Basically, when the ASEAN Economic Ministers agrees upon it, it's a done deal. Because when you talk about ASEAN, everything that we commit is a binding commitment. So this is where ASEAN has been successful to move a lot of things, because when it's binding commitment, if let's say one country doesn't do, we can actually the ASEAN people, we are very embarrassed. We don't want to. We always take care of our water face. We are very concerned that we don't want people to comment. We don't want people to complain that we're not doing our part. So everybody continuously strive to ensure that all commitments are met within the respective time frame, or even if it is not within the time frame, at least we will strive to continue to make it happen. And these meetings, for your information, we always make sure there is a representative of the ASEAN Business Council of the respective country. So for example, if the meeting is being held in Malaysia, so the meetings is attended by the ASEAN Business Council representative in Malaysia, just to make sure that what we discuss, what the ideas that we talk about is actually relevant to the business community. Because there's no point for policymakers to continue talking about improving business environment, which is not relevant to the business community itself. So that is actually the framework, how we actually work within ASEAN. And then this morning, Dr. Moazzem also mentioned the ASEAN Policy Blueprint for SME Development. Under the ASEAN Policy Blueprint of SME Development, because it was developed together by all 10 countries, everybody has given a full commitment for it. And each of the initiatives have their own lead country to make sure that the commitment happens. When it comes to the implementation of the ideas in the ASEAN Policy Blueprint, it is meant to actually to suit the requirements of the respective country. Because for ASEAN, we have what we call as ASEAN 6, which are the founding member, and the ASEAN 4, which is actually the new members and also whose economic development stage is lower than the ASEAN 6. So ASEAN 4 would be Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, as well as Vietnam. Among the initiatives that we have actually forced among the ASEAN members were the establishment of corporate credit guarantee by all member states. We are all committed to establish one. And also the other initiative is the SME Bank. So each member country, either you establish a new entity called SME Bank, or you must actually move towards pushing one of the commercial banks or development financial institute to become the SME bank, the focal point for SME financing. Okay, now, Anush mentioned about statistical collection, one of the things that because as ASEAN, we also work with our partner country. We have partner country, for example, we have partners with ASEAN India because we have an FTA with India, ASEAN China, another FTA, and so on and so forth. Well, in terms of statistical collection, we found that the best example is actually Japan. Because if any of you here have read the Japanese white paper, they even drill down to the point as how many workers in SMEs actually commit suicide in a year. That is the kind of, we actually, thanks. We actually learn from them how to compile the data, and therefore we also get our departments of statistics within ASEAN region to attend the training, just to make sure that they are aware how to segregate data between SMEs and non-SMEs. Okay, my last point here is on the Malaysian perspective. How does Malaysia support in this entire agenda for regional cooperation? Just for your information, in the past 3 years, Malaysia, together with ASEAN, from some support from donor countries, we actually annually organize the ASEAN China SME Conference, ASEAN India SME Conference, ASEAN Korea SME Conference, with the intention of bringing the business community together into one platform, so then they are able to engage with each other. And during this session, we always, the invitation to the SMEs to participate in these conferences, we usually ask for 3, but we always make sure that one of the participants must be woman entrepreneur. This is actually to ensure that there are opportunities being provided also for women entrepreneurs to network within the region. I think I end with it now. Thank you very much.
Wow. I think a lot of food for thought there in terms of the Malaysian experience and also of ASEAN in terms of integration and coordination, that I think we have a lot to aspire to in that. I've left Mr. Moazzem to the end because he had the opportunity in the morning, but now let me ask Mr. Moazzem from Research Center for Policy Dialogue to give his comments.
From my view, I think South Asian countries have, though they often found that it is mentioned that SME contributes the large part of enterprises' employment and like this and that. But in my understanding, politically or in terms of the policy level, it is not actually adequately give importance. Maybe you can ask that there are SME policies there, in each and every country have their necessary policies regarding SMEs, but that is only for the in the pages. In terms of the implementation and effective operation, it is basically in a policy point of view, basically large, to some extent, medium enterprises are being focused as a major drivers of economic growth. So my point is that if we like to actually give SMEs as a driver of economic growth, it is necessary to actually revisit the policies, that how the SMEs can make them competitive, functional in the context of a domestic market as well as in the international market point of view. And that's why the policies are more focusing on the formal sector, corporate sector, and the large sector, and there are some biasness in that respect. And you know it very well that institutional framework is not sufficiently developed for these SMEs, and there is no specific effective trade bodies who could actually work for the SMEs, while the preferential sectors are being set up, or while the budgetary support is provided for them. So that is I think one kinds of drawbacks that we need to actually consider, that if we really means business to make the SMEs the drivers of growth, we need to actually provide effective policies for development of SMEs. In that context, I think it is important to actually put focus on the informal enterprises, which is the larger part of SMEs. And in that context, it is important to make them formalized and make the processes to be more easy and clear. By that, they could actually become enter in the formal process and get the benefit and support what is available for them. And I think it is possible for SMEs to make them contribute both in the forward linkage as well as in the backward linkage part of the value chain, which is largely absent now. Most of the SMEs are actually involved in the production phase and little have their role in the backward and the forward linkage part. I think they have a very good role to play there. And as just we have heard about the ASEAN experience, we definitely understand that how they have actually developed their policies in terms of enterprise development, entrepreneurship development. I think that we have a good examples and the good lessons that we could actually take from SMEs. My final point in this context is that, though I like to actually reply in the plenary, but I couldn't, is that we should actually put emphasis on competition, but should not put overemphasis on the competition, because we understand that is a dual market, and there are lots of less competitive and informal operation is taking place even within the sector. So if we actually put excessive focus on competition, that would actually hurt the development and the growth of the SMEs. Which we also like to actually see that SMEs should develop in a vertical manner from small to medium and large, and to try to become competitive. So competition is good, but should not be overemphasis and over-focused for the sake of market. Rather, we should focus on enterprise development in the context of SMEs in South Asia. Thank you.
Thank you. I think just following up on that, one of the experiences that the Asia Foundation has had in terms of bringing the informal into the discourse in some ways, it's very difficult to actually bring the smaller micro enterprises into a policy discourse, because inevitably what happens is that the chambers and even the district chambers, district level chambers, the membership doesn't include these informal enterprises. And so as a result, when we formulate a policy, and Anushka gave some examples in terms of what a policy should look like, but it really also needs to be an inclusive policy, because it's very hard to bring them into the discussion as well. I'd like to open it up for discussion, and we have about 45 minutes, so maybe we'll just go around the room and then have the panelists comment after. So if you could identify yourself and just...
Center for Policy Dialogue. I have been exposed to discussions on SMEs for close to now about 55 years, which means that probably before many of you over there were actually born. And it may be reassuring for most of you to know that conversations which I heard 55 years ago on what we should do about SMEs are still going on and are reflected in the discussions I've heard over here. From this, it should not surprise too many of us in South Asia that South Asia is something of a graveyard for the SME sector, with lots of ideas and very little progress. So let me get you on to some very specific issues, because your discussions went on at a certain level of abstraction. And why do we not get down to business? Now, there are two central elements which the discussion has never adequately addressed. One is the whole issue of externalities relating to smallness, which is essentially integral to the whole market linkages of the SMEs. Everyone has all sorts of good supply-side ideas for the SME sector, but nothing at all about how markets function and how they integrate into markets. And secondly, why have we not attempted to internalize the experiences of the two great success stories of SMEs, South Korea and Japan, which essentially established supply chains where SMEs were integrated into the supply chains of large-scale industries. Now, how this relationship was brought about, what were the specific features of that, and how this both gave you quality control and technology upgrade are lessons which don't seem to have been internalized in South Asia. Now, secondly, on the externality question, again in my brief presentation yesterday, I brought to your notice the whole experience of the 40,000 Lijjat women. 40,000 women who came together to make papadams in their household, but in fact were integrated into a scaled enterprise, which provided them with all the externalities appropriate to a big enterprise. Access to markets, negotiating with banks, providing quality control, preparing quality intermediate inputs to be provided to the women as they are working in their household, and which has made Lijjat into the largest papad producing enterprise in India. But it is serviced by, as producers, and owned by 40,000 women. So no one somehow talks about this experience, and no one attempts to learn this and apply it across the South Asia region. The third relevant experience that I would want to bring to your attention is, for example, the BRAC Orang experience, where in fact BRAC, which is the largest NGO in the world, it is in Bangladesh, mobilized, about 60 to 80,000 women in developing a supply chain for handicraft enterprises, provided them with the credit, provided them with the quality control, provided them with upgraded technology, and then provided them with markets, both national and international. They created a supply chain. Now, what I would essentially say is for all these supply chains, both for the vertical ones from the corporate sector to the SMEs, and for, say, the NGOs providing the basic global market access to the supply chain. Fab India is a good example of the Indian component of that. What I would like to see, because this will provide both stability and inclusion into the relationship, is that for supply chains to be made equity partners in that supply chain, so that even for the verticalized enterprises, it would be appropriate for the mother enterprise to make the suppliers into their business partners as equity partners. This would essentially mean it would inject stability into the relationship, because there would then be a certain institutionalized loyalty whereby you could invest in them, you could give them credit, you would in fact be able to give them technology upgrades, and then they would not run away and market their products through someone else. So these seem to be the essential elements for addressing this issue of inclusive private sector development, because somehow the word inclusion has again somehow been sort of lost somewhere in the discourse. And if you want to get down to talking business, in fact in Sri Lanka, I had conversations, I think, with HEED. HEED is, no, it was one of your big NGOs, which in fact had a program of in fact dealing with supply chains for coconut-based products, which they were then marketing. Again, the discussion I had with them was, why are these people not integrated into a structured supply chain where they become your business partners and you do what Orang is doing with their supply chain in the Sri Lankan context. So these small, hundreds and thousands of small producers get aggregated, acquire all the characteristics of bigness and external economies, and then become competitors in both national and global markets. If you mean business, unless you really go through that process of competitiveness, these are all going to be conversation pieces, and my sons and grandsons will be having the same conversations in similar groups in South Asia another 50 years from now. Thank you.
I think it's an interesting point, this, for example, the Fab India experience of, John Bissell creating this. But what the question that arises really is how does one institutionalize it? I mean, is the model picked up by chambers and done, or is it a government that then puts it forward? It's pockets of these sort of cases like what you're highlighting are out there, but how does one actually make it into something that is practically implemented by all across the region in some systematic way? And I think that's the hard part. We've got two more over there.
Yeah, I am from the University of Delhi, and I am also associated with Wadhwani Foundation. The objective of Wadhwani Foundation is to promote small and medium enterprises. They are focusing on skill development and innovations. I am a part of their policy unit. In fact, I am heading that policy unit of Wadhwani Foundation to promote research in this area, to really do some sort of advocacy eventually, to have a set-aside policy for small and medium enterprises. That is our objective. And currently I am working on innovation in MSMEs, and I have come out with a working paper. And I agree with Professor Shobhan that we are still talking year after year in the same tone about MSMEs and small scale, except that we now call them MSME. The basic discourse remains the same, only that nomenclature has changed. Now, but in the developed world, this is not so. The discourses have changed, policies have changed, and they are focused on the small sector. In fact, the Europe has this policy which is called Think Small First, and the entire focus is on that. But again, there is an important catch here. When we talk about MSMEs or SMEs, as you are saying, we are just treating them as a homogeneous sector. It is not a homogeneous sector. The world over, this has changed now. This has been categorized according to the stage of development, according to innovation intensity. So we have different categories. If you have this combination and permutation, there are 4 categories that emerge out of it. And this is the first category, which has the young and innovative farms, which is the most vulnerable group in this MSME sector. And this is where most developed countries are focusing upon, including Korea. Korea is also an OECD country. So all these OECD countries are focusing on this component. These are called YOLIs. These are, and the entire focus is on how to promote innovations and how to promote entrepreneurship through the promotion of this young dynamic sector, because this is found to be the most dynamic sector, and this is found to be based upon entrepreneurship. Because entrepreneurship doesn't merely mean passive entrepreneurship. Because you are not doing anything, because you are not able to get a job, you are doing some sort of business. So that is not what is considered as entrepreneurship in this literature. So they say that something which is based upon real entrepreneurship, which is based upon new ideas, new innovations, that is the most dynamic sector. It is found that in the US, he was talking about the example of Korea and Japan, but let me talk about US, which is considered to be the land of large businesses. There, 60 to 70% of net job creation comes from this group of firms. That is what they have shown, and they have entire SBA, Small Business Administration, and they are actually promoting. The entire focus is on that. In the mid-1990s, there was a new dynamism in American economy, and it was found that it was all because of this segment of the enterprises. In fact, in 1981 itself, they started a policy called SBIR, Small Business Innovation and Research. And the focus of this program was to promote this particular group of enterprises, that is innovative, highly innovative young enterprises. A lot of grants are given. Annually, they are funding 4,600 small enterprises which are young, and they are based upon new technological ideas. And this is the reason now that you have this Facebook and things like that. All those they are the product of that system which is there in the I'm really surprised to see the response in this section and in the participation in this session. It is, people are not really enthusiastic about it. But if you really look at the literature, that's what I am doing. And if you find that in the US and the entire literature on entrepreneurship is based upon this group of enterprises for Europe and for Korea, and also the America, the US. So, this is why this is actually what now we should start thinking along, how we can promote. In India, we have started that. We have started a scheme which is shaped on the US policy of SBIR. We call it SIBRI, SBIRI, SBIR of India. So this actually, the Department of Biotechnology has promoted that. In fact, I am evaluating its impact, and I would like to show how this policy has really, this has affected new ideas in the biotech sector, and how this should be extended to other sectors as well. So I think that these things should be now picked up, and the young generation should be told about these experiences so they get enthused about that, and the entire discourse changes from just talking about small scale financial problem, this problem, that problem, to how to really promote this segment and what is the potential of this segment for the economy, and how, when we talk about the financial support, how this sector becomes the most important sector which has the claim on this financial support given by the governments. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll move on to the other question. I just, put out also just a comment on in terms of what you're talking about. What about the issue of sort of the separation of education in South Asia from the concept of entrepreneurship? It's something that one thinks about a lot in a Sri Lankan context, and I'm not sure how relevant it is to the rest of South Asia. But we're bringing up our children to be doctors, lawyers, engineers, and there's this sort of a stream of education objectives which are on a different path entirely. And then at the same time, we're saying, okay, what about entrepreneurship? Let's get everybody out in business. And the two are completely divergent. Why do we think our children are actually going to start businesses when we've told them all along, do well in your A-levels and get a proper job, right? Yeah, so I just, want to put that out there as well. Go ahead.
I'm Kishore Goswami from IIT Kharagpur. Last few years, I am working actually on development of women entrepreneurship, mostly in informal sector. I just want to share some of my experience. So, the first experience what I want to share with you is that adoption of technology. Most of these technologies we are having, but these are not based on local needs. Technology is there, but it is not useful for most of these entrepreneurs. They are not adopting. Because here basically again that random utility model will go back related to that adoption and not adoption. All issues are there. Another issue this gentleman already raised, that is marketing. Because a lot of exploitation is going on with respect to marketing also. I have a product can be very easy. Another is low productivity. We really cannot compare, maybe particularly in women entrepreneurship development, maybe it will be unfair to compare straight to a productivity, because here question will come that on what basis we are measuring productivity. Because one of our study say that releasing from household duty is one of that major factor of developing women entrepreneurship. Another issue is concessional loan or SME bank. I do not know in which direction it is going to work, but we have to be very, very careful with respect to giving maybe some concessional loan. Because in certain cases, in real life, what is happening, say 50% subsidy is there related to a particular industry. Initially, bank is refusing, government is giving 50% subsidy. Bank is not very encouraged to give that loan. Why? Because rest 50% is very difficult to recover. So what bank is doing it in black and white, they are actually giving 50%, which is actually the subsidy. So if it is a loan is say 1 lakh, only they are giving 50,000. But in pen and paper, maybe it is showing 1 lakh is giving. Then bank is not having any risk of recovering that loan. So that is maybe another issue. And lastly, I want to add here about value addition. When we talk about maybe the strengthening maybe small and medium enterprises, we really have to give more emphasis to supply chain as well as value addition. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's very fascinating to hear this, and I'm particularly thankful for this opportunity to share my thoughts, because I was chairing a session on creating productive employment, a parallel session day before yesterday. Initially, I was invited as a panelist, and then I was subsequently, if I may say, kicked up to be the chair, so I clearly understood that organizers didn't want me to say what I wanted to say. They didn't want to hear. So this is a great opportunity for me to say something that I wanted to say, which is, and I'll share this in the form of something that I think in South Asia we do best, which is to talk in terms of stories rather than in numbers. And I just wanted to share two anecdotes here. One is a couple of weeks ago, I was at one of the schools in Delhi. It's a leading school. It's among the top 10 schools in the country. It's been recently ranked. And, so in that function on Independence Day, 15th of August, the school chose to felicitate its, the highest achiever of the 12 years of schooling. So, they felicitated this student, and it just so happened that after the felicitation ceremony was over, the student during the lunchtime sat by my side. So I just asked him, what has it taken you to become the president of the student council and won this, highest achievers award in 12 years? And he thought for a while, and he said that I just blindly followed what my teacher said all through 12 years. Now, it comes back to exactly the point that you made. I was it gave me a mixed feeling of partly happiness, but, in terms of discipline, but also a lot of disappointment. Teachers are, of course, very happy with such students, but you can imagine what it does to, the role models that are getting created in education. So one is, of course, the issue of the disciplines that are getting promoted, and as parents, we are also responsible for that. But the other issue is also about the kind of culture that we are promoting in schools, the kind of role models that we are promoting in schools, where compliance, obedience is valued over thinking, creativity. And I think that's where the problem starts. Now let me, having said this, give you a positive story of entrepreneurship, despite all the challenges that we have heard, and many that we have not discussed yet, which is again in the form of a story. So in one of the industry associations gathering in Delhi, it actually was Chandigarh, where a lot of people had come along and they were talking about what does it take to start a business. And there was a foreign delegation which was wanting to understand what is the investment climate like. So people were talking about all the challenges that we mentioned and many more micro details, until towards the end, one gentleman got up and he said that, look, I don't understand all of this. I have a very small time entrepreneur, but I have grown quite big. And then he gave some statistics about his business. And he said, to be honest, I don't understand any of these licenses, access to credit, the quality requirements, etc. What did I do? I'll just tell you what I did. And he said that I decided, I had an idea and I just decided to implement it and run it as a business. So I started it in my home. And he said that I knew that if it doesn't succeed, it will not attract any attention. But if it does succeed, it will begin to attract attention of all the regulators, and which is how it happened. So, as this person began to succeed in his business, the regulators and the local inspectors began to suddenly notice that there is somebody earning money and they're not getting their share. And, so they every time he will climb up the ladder of his profit margins, somebody will come up and say, by the way, do you have this license? And this is, sir, I don't know what this license. Oh, you need to have this license, otherwise, we will shut down your business. He'll immediately, promptly, make some transaction negotiation, and the license is obtained. And through that process, he actually managed to, in 10 years, obtain more than 100 licenses without having known what these licenses are all about. But this is also a positive story of entrepreneurship, and I just wanted to highlight that. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
That's an interesting note on which I'm going to go back to the panelists and use the remaining time. If you could just pick, things that you would like to comment on, maybe we'll just go in order of
okay.
to start it.
Sure. Well, let's start with the issue of the that Anushka mentioned, and I really like the story about the educational system. So, because it shows the conformist view, and that the only thing is, as much as true as it is, and the stories that you have for for South Asia. I'm just trying to think from the very poor or segment of the population. How does it impact to them? And then it's in that sector where you have the stories of like how a illiterate woman getting associated with others to produce, how the constraints that they might have, and it relates a lot to investment in education. So it's more than just the system, it's also just the level of investment that you have actually been able to undertake to stimulate people. People that are poor, they lack not only of nutrients and of other things, but just also the type of motivations that they must facing must be very different. So it's just something to bear in mind. I like the point on so that's the culture of education. On the innovation part, I like very much the issue of the age of the firms that you're referring to. Because this is all the research for the US and for the OECD countries is pointing out as what you will have to support is not only small enterprises, but also the young ones. And that's an issue that for any type researcher will need to have information to deal with that element that is absent from most of the research that we've seen today. So pay attention to that, to age, because it determines a lot the outcomes. And just one quick point on on bringing the SMEs together and how they deal on contracting. A lot of the ideas that we have about how SMEs can be doing business is because we assume that they can draw very nice contracts and that they can be enforced. And if you look at the doing business indicators for South Asia, one aspect where there's the weakest is in the enforcement of that of contracts. And we should be looking more at that when we look at studies that want to study SMEs. Look how how can you enforce a contract that you have drawn with another party? Can you take it to the court? Can you settle the dispute? And those are just constraints, or the type of research that has looked into that is minimal. So I would welcome to have more of those issues. I can say some more, but I would like to also look at that.
Yeah. I think I'm going to pick up on what Sama said. And when we talk about SMEs in South Asia, and certainly in Sri Lanka, it's always a very dire picture. SMEs contribute this much, but there isn't enough support, and so on. In Harjun Chang's book, 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism, he says, why does everyone say there's no entrepreneurship in developing countries? But whether it's the Dabawala in India or the Khade man in Sri Lanka or the hundreds of vendors who show up on the streets of a cricket match selling exactly what you need, right? Whether it's food or the sticker of your country flag, there's entrepreneurship. But so that's just one thought I want to leave, and maybe that's also because for those kind of things, the government is not in the way. When I talked about holistic SME policy and all of those words that I use to discuss SME policy and strategy, it may have sounded like I was promoting some overbearing mega structure that the government comes and puts in place saying, okay, this is what we're going to do for SME policy. But actually I meant quite the opposite and a more nuanced view. What I guess I would like to convey is that with regard to promoting SMEs, the government, a government decides, really looks at all the things that need to happen for an SME policy and realize what it's good at and what it's not good at. For instance, the government may decide, you know what, we shouldn't be trying to facilitate concessional loan schemes, let's get out of that. Let's do things that no one else would be able to do, or things that could facilitate SMEs without them having to come. So I guess that's what I meant, just smarter policy, and I think that's something we should really think about. Somehow said that we like stories. I'll give you a story from Sri Lanka where we do some work on nanotechnology, and I met this guy who was a young engineer, and he had gone through school, won all these awards, and he had developed a nano coating, a titanium dioxide coating, where when you just coat a regular CFL bulb with it, it actually purifies the air around that light bulb. And he started very small. He started by just coating these. He bought CFL light bulbs, asked Philips to give him a few here in Sri Lanka, and he started just coating them with that titanium dioxide nano coating. And then he went national, and he just won some awards at an invention in Geneva, and he's just got a contract to supply hundreds of Indian hospitals, and he's trying to negotiate one with the Indian Railways. Now, what I saw with him was that he had the drive, but somehow the government doesn't know about nanotechnology enough. So they haven't yet got there. So I guess, again, we need to figure out getting smarter about SME policy, getting out of the way of certain things, and government getting in the way. Professor Rehman Subhan challenged us to move away from the abstract. And one thing I'd just like to respond, I think in SME policy, in discussions and theories on SME development, subcontracting comes up as one of the things you have to do, supply chains. But I think we should also remember, and this at least is because, at least when I speak to SMEs, you realize that if there's one thing that you can do to help SMEs to develop their own subcontracting, where there isn't a government policy or a mandate where bigger firms have to subcontract, or trying to impose the structure of supply chain. If there's one thing, I think it would be just helping SMEs run their businesses better. And that's something, I mean, you see larger corporates have access to the KPMGs, the E&Ys to help restructure their business, streamline their operations, energy management, human resource management. SMEs don't have that. And often, whether it's accessing credit, adopting technology, convincing a large enterprise like Toyota to buy parts from you, like what happened in Japan. And in Japan, what happened was that these enterprises were good enterprises. There were institutes at a national level that helped enterprises manage themselves as enterprises better, not depend on cash handouts from the government, not depend on a donor-funded concessionary scheme, just run their businesses like businesses. So I think that both for the small and the medium is really important. So this is the thought I think.
Thank you.
I think it's been a very interesting deliberation, and a lot of the concerns have been raised by the observation here. Professor Rahman rightly touched on, but of course the changes are getting slow. But I think the fact is that the reasons that we have to really work on it. Of course, the SMEs, because of their access to market, information and training, HRD, all these factors are the reasons of not the growth that we are expecting. But the fact behind all these factors is they are the exposures that they are getting, mostly in the papers, but they have putting their own efforts. And one factor that we always have to make it a fact is that the low productivity of the SMEs are not being able to compete in the international or in the bigger scale. So the economies of scale, I think, is one factor that we have to look into it. And their backward and forward integration has to be there. When you're talking about the chain, I think that's how one has to be inclusive, And of course, when you come out with certain products, of course, there are the figures that works out at the end of the day is you have to compete. And of course, the private sector, this morning they were putting a lot of questions on private sector not willing to compete. But I say we are already accepted the open market economy. So it's not that we have to, we can remain in that protected economy. So we have to compete. But the fair competition has to be there. Unhealthy competition should be avoided. I was given an example in the early session that we are competing and in a way that it's a destructive competition. I was saying that changing the buyer's market to the seller's market. And these factors are really, that is what needs to be considered in a big way. And of course, the government has to create an environmental, very conducive policy so that these are implementable, and also the confidence building in the private sector has to be there. Private sector I always consider as the engine of growth, but then at times, sometimes they are made the compartment. It's not the engine, So these are the facts that has to be taken into, and we are not only complaining, but we have to complement also each other. And of course, it's a cohesive effort by the private sector, by the government, the policymakers, and the lack of communication has really created so much of doubts in each other. So this confidence building process has to be there, and we know that the SMEs are the ones that's going to make a difference in the country. Even in the process of industrialization, they start at the early beginning, as Anushka rightly said, how one can grow. And I think there are lots of examples that we can quote. And I think with this, I just want to give you one example in Nepal. So we have started one product in one village, one product. So we're just focusing on a particular product so that the whole the community is focusing on that, and the scale of operation is there, the marketability of it is there, the backward purchase agreements are there. So that is helping the whole community. I think that's how one can grow. And of course, there are challenges and opportunities. So it's how we can tap the opportunities and fight the challenge. And that's the challenge for the private sector always.
Thank you. I think I'm going to start with Mr. Majumdar and work inwards so that Mr. Rahman can give us an ASEAN perspective to end, because I think that will give us a sense of where we should be heading possibly. So why don't I
Thank you.
give it to Mr. Majumdar.
Many good points have been made. Professor Raman had made that very valid point about Korea and Japan. Of course, not on theoretical level, but on a practical operational level, what we have picked up from Korea when we're trying to push our government to adapt such a model is that in KOTRA, the Korea Trade Investment Promotion Agency, there is one SME Globalization Support Center. They have set up, I think, last 10 months or 12 months back. And we have found out that through this center, they have been doing quite good facilitation and support measures. And in an interesting term, they have used movable KOTRA. Means, very briefly, they are physically moving to various provinces, various state, I mean our equivalent of states, and helping the SMEs out. So we have found that our interaction with the Korean counterparts have shown that it is really yielding results in terms of both getting new export orders, turning new export community, and also expanding the existing exporters. So that is so far as about some, just partially addressing the Korea example. And that time, because I couldn't manage time more efficiently, so I couldn't really highlight the role of chambers. In all humility, what we have been trying in our chamber in FICCI in India, that we are trying to inculcate that cultural change which is needed, which in our view is needed really to better integrate with the process A, and B, as you have correctly pointed out, to really serve as the vehicle for this inclusive growth. So what we have been trying, we are trying to tell them, we are trying to handhold them and provide some guidance and counseling, and we are trying to tell them that, see, in today's circumstances, it is not enough to get one business order or two. That is not the end of it. You have to operate in such manner that the longevity is high and higher than what it used to be in the past, in the backdrop of high mortality rate of SMEs or small enterprises in South Asia, maybe elsewhere too. But we are just trying to teach them how to really look beyond the finding new customers. So all that capacity to learn and to stay in business, that is the only issues we have been trying to inculcate, and we are trying to also tell them very quickly. I know those flags
Flags are coming, so.
So good corporate governance. Corporate governance might sound a bit rhetoric or like high flying, but to manage your business transactions in a better manner, Anushka said about transactions and others, but basically we are just telling them and we are trying to entice them by saying that if you do this, this is not only a statutory requirement, if you do this, it will help you to get more investment, it will help you to get easier credit. So hopefully we'll be successful in our journey. So with that hope.
Thank you. We are coming to the end of our time, but please, Mr. Moazzem.
I have three short points. First, regarding the SAR's comment of participation of SMEs in the market. My point is that we understand that lack of supply chain is one of the hindrance regarding integrated SMEs in the market. So, but who actually invest on developing the supply chains? Is it the private sector or is it the public sector or both? or whether sometimes cooperatives also be formed to actually link these SMEs in the market or not. So that's an important debate, and we also found it such things in case of lack of FDI much invest in Bangladesh, and this is mainly because of lack of supply chain available in the market. So that is one issue that I like to share. Regarding the Ardhana's point about the experience taking from other countries, successful examples, I think it is important to share experiences within the region, and there is not so much data available even within the websites. I have taken a lot of pain to get the data on SMEs to actually prepare the paper, and it would be good whether this kinds of data is making available in the website. And the ASEAN blueprint that they prepared is basically focusing on the web-based access of all kinds of information. They have huge importance provided on web-based accessibility of the data and information. My final point on the entrepreneurship type, and this is right, that even in the ASEAN blueprint, they also provided entrepreneurship as a single topic of curriculum for all ASEAN countries. So that is another of a big jump for entrepreneurship development even at the from the school level. So those kinds of examples even, and we will also add more in your deliberations. Thank you.
Okay, I think I just want to touch on access to credit, because a lot has been discussed on the difficulty for SMEs to actually access to credit. And then with the role of government, how much money can government actually put aside for SME financing? As all of you aware, Malaysia has been rated as #1 in access to credit for the past 4 years, every year without fail. But we're not saying that access to credit, we're not saying that SMEs in Malaysia do not face difficulty to access to credit. But the point I want to make here is you have to look into the firm level. You know, sometimes the issue of these SMEs not being able to access to credit is within their internal operations itself. I believe not just in Malaysia, I'm sure also in South Asia, our SMEs do not understand the importance of record keeping. Sometimes the basic record keeping of, recording the transaction, how much sales, how much payments is out on a daily basis, is not being done by the SMEs. So this is where we work together with the Malaysian Institute of Accountants to educate SMEs. They actually go down to the level of micro enterprises to help them to learn the basic record keeping in order for them to build their business into becoming something which is bankable. And then for the microfinancing, for your information, microfinancing in Malaysia is not just limited to agencies such as Grameen Bank that we borrowed the idea from Bangladesh, but now the commercial banks have been instructed by the central bank since 2004 to provide facilities to micro enterprises. And they are also being held responsible to educate these micro enterprises to learn how to keep proper bookkeeping. In fact, the National Savings Bank, for all micro enterprises that take up loans from them, they have to attend 3-day classes on record keeping, and they are given a basic book, a ledger book, to actually record their transaction, because we feel that there's no way that government will continue to provide the funding, because more and more enterprises will require the financing. And again, as the gentleman mentioned, there could be issues of leakages in terms of the financing provided. So we go back to basic, teach them how to keep their record, build their record keeping, make them bankable, and then again, touching on value chain, because we always believe that if there's a market for SME product, they will move heaven and hell just to get that opportunity. So, and once they get that market opportunity, everything else will fall into place. Thank you.
Okay, I think we've actually run out of time, so I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the panelists, our experts who made really very rich contribution to today's session. And I just want to end to acknowledge Professor Rahman's statement that
that this was a real reality check, I think, for us to take into account, which is that, oh, this has been discussed so many times before. So how do we actually get some of our ideas into practical action? And difficult given the fact that there are no real policymakers in the room as such, which also came up in this morning's discussion, is are we all, preaching to the converted already? I mean, we are all in this together, and so we have to find a way to make sure that this moves beyond simply ideas and policies to some kind of a really concrete reality, and that's the task that is set for ourselves.
Give you a specific suggestion, forget about policymakers. Why does Asia Foundation not investigate why the Lijjat experience in India cannot be replicated in Sri Lanka?
And I think that would be something that I think would be very interesting to do. In fact, you mentioned Fab India, and I'm not sure this is working, but I had some interest in doing that as well, in sort of getting someone to come out, William Bissell to come maybe to talk to some of the small and medium enterprises here, and to the chambers really, to see how can we replicate this, because I think the point that you make is correct. I mean, we really need to look at it.
One is
Lijjat, okay.
Because here are 40,000
women together
who have constituted themselves into a big corporate enterprise. And how can you create the aggregation to have the external economies, which is central to the upgradation of the SME, to become a competitive player in the market? That is the name of the game.
On that note, thank you very much to all of you.